One. What is up, YouTube? HPJ here, and I'm coming at you guys with my counter fairy deck profile. It is a retro deck profile because, funny enough, people are going to ask, wait, counter fairy wasn't a structure deck. Actually, yes, it was. And it had not one but two separate versions. It had a original one back in 2008 with Scourge of Radiance, and then later on in the TCG, about 10 years later, in 2018, with our structure deck Scourge of Radiance in the OCG, and in the TCG, it was called Structure Deck Wave of Light. Now, the whole purpose of it was to bring a lot of the counter trap cards that were in the game into the TCG and give the wave of the R structure deck stuff its chance to live in the TCG without having to put in some special set or premium pack or something like that, because that's initially what happened to the TCG with the original Scourge of Radiance cards. Because Scourge of Radiance and its dark counterpart, the Curse of Darkness, were two structure decks that the TCG never released. Were never released in the TCG. For whatever reason, some speculate because the TCG at that time was already broken enough and they didn't want to give us more cards than we needed, while some speculate that it was just pure greed, so they didn't want to keep things getting more greedier than they already were. Whether that's the truth or not, we did eventually get those cards in a massive amount of reprints for the TCG, including a card that was abused later on in the series, later on in years, which was Eva, that was introduced in this structure deck. Now, Eva's not going to make its appearance here in this deck because this deck is typically just building itself off of Counter Fairy. While in some essence, most of you are probably happy about that, so why not? But I am very excited about this because I get to do Counter Fairies, and it just fits into the whole structure deck situation, because I gave you guys one for Machina, and I'm giving you one for Fairies in Light. And don't worry, fingers crossed, everything gets together. I can give you something for Agents by the end of the month. So, alright, with that said, let's go ahead and get into this. So, starting off with our monster lineup, I'm running 3 copies of the cover of the structure deck, which is Sacred Air Night Parsath. Then that is followed by 3 copies of Guiding Ariadne, 3 copies of Bountiful Artemis, 3 copies of Minerva, the Scholar of Light, 3 copies of Honest, 3 copies of Herald of Orange Light, and 1 copy of the Barrier Statue of Heavens. Alright, that is it for the monsters. For the spells, I have 3 copies of the Sanctum of Parshath, then Raigeki, Darkhold, and Monster Reborn as my spells. Then from there, we have the counter traps, which is basically taking up all the trap card space. 3 copies of Rebirth of Parshath, followed by 3 copies of Red Reboots, 3 copies of Divine Punishment, 3 copies of Ultimate Providence, and then 1 copy each of the Solemn Brigade, Solemn Strike, Solemn Warning, and Solemn Judgment. So that is it for all the cards in the deck. That is a total of 40. And now I'm going to move on into the extra deck. So this build is basically based off of when Cybernetic Horizon was introduced into the TCG. So yes, that means, like you saw a little earlier, 3 copies of Hippo Shenanigan. Then followed by 1 Nightmare Phoenix, 1 Nightmare Cerberus, 1 Nightmare Unicorn, 1 Barrel Sword Dragon, 1 Barrel Low Dragon. Then for my Exceeds, I am running 1 copy of Evilsworn Exciton Knight, 1 1 Steelstorm Roach, 1 Tornado Dragon, 1 Utopia, 1 Utopia Ray, 1 Utopia the Lightning, and 1 Babushka the Terribly Tired Tape Eater. And that is legitimately it for everything that is here in the deck, both the main and the side. The main and the extra. So, okay, let's go through this. So, starting off with our monster lineup, let's talk about our boy, the Sacred Air Night Parsath. Now, many of you are wondering, aren't you missing some extra deck cards? Yeah, I am. I don't have Just like I said in those original videos, I don't own the extra deck Parsath monsters, which are actually supposed to be beneficial due to the counter trap that's in here, the rebirth of Parsath. But I felt that the Sacred Air Knight was definitely was the go-to monster, and has a lot more of the balance that you'll need from it. So, Sacred Arc Air Night Parsath can be special summoned when you activate a counter trap or negate the activation of a spell, trap, or a monster effect, even during the damage, except during the damage step. You can banish 2 other fairies from your hand, field, and or grave to special summon this card from your grave or from your hand to the field. Then, if this card attacks this monster, like almost every other Parsath monster, it inflicts piercing battle damage. Then when this card inflicts battle damage to your opponent, you can add 1 Parsath card or 1 counter trap from your deck to your hand, which makes this one of the ultimate boss monsters you can use for counter fairy. And a monster that's able to banish fairies to bring itself onto the field, then being able to not only benefit from counter traps activating by searching for counter traps or cards that have Parsath in its name, but also being able to then be able to basically just have a free summon, because honestly, this thing is just a big body. That's really what it is. It's the big body with piercing battle damage and the ability to search out for your Parsath cards. Because most of your negation isn't coming from this. It's coming from all the stuff that you're going to be running that this card searches for. All your counter traps and stuff are going to be benefiting from this. I did remember in the version that I ran that I was mostly trying to focus on Battle for Artemis as well, who we'll talk about in just a moment. But with Sacred Air Night Sacred Arc Air Night Parsath, you're really just having this big body come to the board to strike some piercing damage, search for your counter traps, and then have all your other cards pretty much play the relay game for you. So, and on a level 9 at that too. Alright, moving on is Guiding Ariadne. Yeah, you guys remember this card from back during the Pendulum format. Well, it's here in this deck, and its major purpose is to serve for one thing. While it's in the Pendulum Zone, you apply these following effects. You pay no life points to activate a counter trap, and you do not have to discard when you activate a counter trap. That is simply the sole reason why this card is here. Because of the fact that it is able to make sure 2 of the biggest costs that you would ever have to do in this deck, you do not have to do as long as it's on the field. And that is to pay to discard, and paying life points to trigger a counter trap. And mind you, a lot of the counter traps that I just showed you, a lot of them have 1 or 2 of those as its main component. Some of them even have all 3, which is to discard or pay life points. One of the biggest benefits to that was during the era of the Pendulum, especially during PayPay format. People were playing Guiding Ariadne because it allowed you to play Solemn Warning and Solemn Strike without having to pay your life points for it. The other thing about this card is that if it's destroyed by battle or card effect, you'll reveal 3 counter traps from your deck, and then your opponent has to choose 1 and add it to your hand. So you can easily just choose basically a set of your counter traps. Your opponent has to at least is going to have to pick it, so they just pick whichever one, and then you send the rest back to the deck. And it's just an easier way to flesh out your counter traps without having to do so much work. Moving on from there, we're going to go into the next of the monsters, and that's the big boy himself, Bountiful Artemis. Immediately after a counter trap is activated and it resolves, draw 1 card. Remember, Bountiful Artemis has been in this game for a good period of time, and because of that, Counter Fairy definitely heavily relied on this card because of its ability to draw you into new cards. With a decent enough stat wave of 1600 attack, 1700 defense, Artemis did hold a good portion of things to itself. And it's one of the it's the reason why you call it Counter Fairy, because Artemis was your draw power. Artemis was one of the things that you rushed to put onto the board. I do remember in the structure deck, they gave you, Ties of the Brethren, so that you can end your turn on 2 other counter fairies and then have the Artemis in play, or have another fairy on the field and get to the Artemis, because of the fact that you're going to have a lot of back row and stuff setting up for the things that you need to. You can easily put in your Ties of the Brethren if you want to, just to play around with it. I gotta really look at that older build too, so I definitely think that would be good, something good to look at. All right, with Battleful Artemis out of the way, we have Minerva, the Scholar of the Sky, which each time a counter trap is activated and rarely after it resolves, this card will gain 500 attack. Then, if Sanctuary of the Sky is in play, you can add a counter trap with a different name from your graveyard to your hand. So it allows you to recycle your counter traps while also being able to increase its attack points every time a counter trap is active. So you can play a lot of counter traps and make this thing a really big beat stick, while also just getting them back in Sanctuary of the Sky. And don't worry, we have ways to talk about Sanctuary of the Sky in just a moment, so that way you don't feel like, well, where is the Sanctuary? Because you ain't playing it. But don't worry, we got that covered. Next up is, well, every light deck's favorite utility card, Honest. And I'm definitely running 3 of these because when you start running and smacking into monsters, hey, if you can do as much points of damage as you can or get rid of something really big as soon as possible, that's all you have to do, is you got that nice hot Honest. Alright, then from there we have Herald of Orange Light. Now, Herald of Orange Light can easily be taken out of this deck, and you can probably run some spell cards in place of it, like Ties of the Brethren. But I forgot that Herald of Orange Light wasn't limited at that point in time, so we're going to rock out with some Herald of Orange Light. So what is up with Herald of Orange Light? Well, you discard it and a fairy type monster from your hand to negate the activation of a monster effect and destroy it. There are 2 other variations of this monster, as well as a linked monster, as well, to conjoin with the Herald series. And the other 2 are Herald of Green and Herald of Purple Light, which Herald of Green negates monster effects, Herald of Purple negates trap cards. And one of the big benefits to having such a elusive spell, an elusive monster like this, is just being able to dump fodder into the graveyard so you can trigger off your Air Night Parsath and have material for your Air Night Parsath, which still benefits you tremendously. Then moving on to the last monster in the deck, of course, is the Barrier Statue of the Heavens. And this is at the point where Barrier Statue of the Stormwind wasn't seeing as much play as it did before it got banned. The Barrier Statue of the Heavens, the Barrier Statue of the Abyss, and the other 4 Barrier Statues were pretty much just there as alternatives for their attribute or their particular specific type of deck to counteract all the other summons that were going to be going crazy. For this, it's the summons that are not light. And, well, it did actually pretty worked well, unless you had to run into a counter fairy deck that was also playing against a ton of lights, which is still possible. And the thing about this was that if I had 2 more, I'd definitely be running them. The thing about the various statues was that their main purpose was to serve as floodgates to stop your opponent from special summoning, especially at a time where special summoning had already had its own issues. This was just there to kind of just niche those things out. Alright, moving on from that, we're going into spells. And, well, we have the biggest spell of them all. This is the Sanctum of Parsath. While this card is on the field or in the graveyard, it is treated, its name becomes Sanctuary of the Sky. Then, all your fairy monsters on the field gain 300 attack and defense. Your set spells and traps cannot be targeted by or destroyed by card effects. And once a turn, you can target a total of 3 fairy and or counter traps in the graveyard with different names, and shuffle them, and then put them on top of your deck in any order. So, you can arrange them in any order. So this is basically your Sanctuary of the Sky. It wouldn't hurt you to play the actual Sanctuary of the Sky, but the thing about Sanctum was that this was a way to retrieve your counter traps and your fairies. This was a way to have access to Sanctuary of the Sky without having to, run amok. And because of how many things were able to get you to Sanctuary of the Sky, or Sanctum of Parsath, you didn't really have to worry about running Sanctuary. Sanctuary was being ran in other builds of decks, but for this one, I didn't run the Sanctuary when I already had one going, and I had, the multiple ways to search for it. Now, for the rest of it, well, we just had some standalones. We got Raigeki and Darkhold for the massive removals, and we have Monster Reborn to bring back whatever we possibly needed to. Because fun fact, that Parsath doesn't have any exclusions to it being summoned. So, you can easily summon it off of a discard for a monster effect, for a card's effect, and then play Monster Reborn to bring it right back. moving on into my trap cards, and this is where things get bulky. Starting off with the Rebirth of Parsath. So this counter trap basically can negate the effects of a spell, trap, or monster effect by not only revealing a counter trap in your hand, but then discarding card and paying 1,000 your life points to negate the activation of that card. And if you do, you shuffle that card into the deck. Then you're able to summon a Parsath monster from your deck or extra deck. So it was a free way to cheat out a Parsath from either your main deck or your extra deck, while also being able to negate a spell, trap, or monster effect. But it has the heaviest cost out of any counter trap that would, because it's doing all of the things that a counter trap would. You know, discarding a card from your hand, paying 1,000 life points, and then revealing a counter trap in your hand as well. This is why people were running the triple guiding Ariadnes with this deck, because it basically made sure that the only thing you had to do was just reveal the counter trap. So you didn't have to pay the life points, and you didn't have to, you didn't have to pay the life point, and you didn't have to discard the card for the effect. Otherwise, you're just pretty much negating the card for free. And who wouldn't enjoy one of those? And that's definitely why you play 3 of these, because it helps you just rush out your Parsaths. Now, moving on from that is the Infinite Red Reboot, which could be activated from your hand at a cost of half your life points, but thanks to your combination of cards, like your continuous spell, you didn't have to, like your IRNA, you didn't have to do that. Now, this thing basically negated the activation of the trap card, put it back face down, and then force your opponent to take a take a trap card from their deck and place it face down, and then they can activate any trap cards for the rest of the turn. Meaning those are free fighters for things to blow up cards. Just trust and believe, Red Reboot was a nasty card for people to come up with, to the point where they had to limit the card, and even limiting it, they had to ban it because it was just that good. So, you see there is a triple set of Red Reboot. Now, moving on from Red Reboot, we have Sanctuary of the Sky's unique counter trap itself, the Divine Punishment. When a spell, trap, or monster effect is activated while you have Sanctuary of the Sky on the field, negate the activation. If you do, destroy it. This card only really works in conjunction with Sanctuary of the Sky, and because Sanctuary of Parsath is Sanctuary of the Sky, well, you didn't have to worry too much about it. You just flip this card and get to work. So, then from there we have Ultimate Providence. This is basically another Omni counter trap. Negate the activation of a spell, trap, or monster effect by simply discarding one of the following cards that you're trying to negate from your hand to do such. So, yeah, that was pretty much it. Like, this was another one of those really good reprints and really good cards to substitute for things, because negation is a thing, and it was very beautiful to help out with. Moving on from there is the Solemn Brigade, and I believe most of the Solemn cards were at 1. If they weren't at 1, well, hell, they are at 1 now. And I was basically using one of each just to survive that I had something to help out. The biggest thing here is that Solemn Judgment, which came back from the Forbidden Limited list at 1, because it had already served enough more time on the ban list than it already needed to. But alright, that is all of the things for the main deck. Now let's go on into this extra. The main purpose of this extra deck is just to talk about Hip Hoshinigan. The retrain of Hoshinigan, who was already out as, you know, the generic buff support for light attributed monsters. And it finally got a link version of itself. You need 2 light attributed monsters for its summon, and points the bottom left and bottom right, which was of course one of the most generic link markers you could ever need. 500 attack and defense increase to all light monsters, 400 attack and defense decrease for all dark monsters. And just like the rest of its just like the rest of those from the set, from that lineup of attack and defense boosting attributed monsters, if this card was destroyed by battle or card effect, you can target 1 light monster in your graveyard and add it to your hand. You're going to use this effect of Hip Hoshinigan once per turn. And running in 3Ds was just a simple way of being able to have the boost if needed. But like I said, most of the support you were needing from this deck just came from most of the monsters in it. But the extra deck was still used just in case. It's crazy enough to think about it, because only a few months later they introduced Pot of Extravagance, which I think would definitely help this deck in terms of power. Moving on from there, we have a lot of generic cards. We have the Nightmare Phoenix, the Nightmare Cerberus, and the Nightmare Unicorn. Unicorn to bounce cards by discarding a card. Nightmare Cerberus by discarding the card to destroy a monster. and Nightmare Phoenix by discarding a card to destroy a spell or trap. Then going into the other monsters, you have your two big boys, Barrel Load and Barrel Sword, just in case you wanted some advanced support there. We have tons of rank 4 monsters, but your variations can be however you want them to be. For massive removal, Exciton Knight, to deal with high level monsters, Evil Swarm Roach. For spells and traps, we had Tornado Dragon. The Utopia package, reaching into Utopia the Lightning, to just have a big beat stick. And Babushka, the Terribly Tired Tape Eater, just to have a wall to sit on while you set up everything else you needed. So, with that said and done, ladies and gentlemen, that is it for my Counter Fairy retro deck profile. Knocking out literally 2 to 3 decks in one. This was a very fun experience to revisit the Counter Fairies, and I'm sure many of you are too. Let me know, what is your favorite card from the Counter Fairies? What is your favorite Air Night card? You know, let me know all these nice things about the light attribute in the comment section below. With that said and done, thank you guys so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel, as it helps me out tremendously. You can hit the notification bell to be informed of when I do upload more content to my channel. My socials are in the description box below. And with that said and done, HPJ signing out. Take care.